Well, good evening and welcome into the PressPros Magazine Monday Huddle. I'm Bruce Hooley. That gentleman sitting beside me or positioned beside me on the web here is Mr. Sonny Folks, and we are here to talk with you about the state football finals. And what a weekend it was. Another great weekend for the MAC, a state championship for Marion Local. It's 13th. Another state championship for New Bremen. It's second in 3 years. And we'll let Sonny make an opening comment, and then we'll bring in the head coach of the Marion Local Flyers, Tim Goodwin. So thanks, everyone, for joining us.
I'm celebrating the end of football season by wearing my John Fetterman hoodie.
There you go. Congratulations.
That's
Wonderful.
all I got to say.
Maybe you'll get elected. You'll get elected to serve our country. That'll be great.
Boy, it was a good weekend. We saw some tremendous talent in Canton, and of course, you just mentioned Marion having won their 13th this weekend, and what a privilege it is to have been around. I've seen them win at least 8 of the 13 now, and to go back and think about seeing a dynasty like that, and they are a dynasty in Ohio high school football. There's no question about that now, and it's just thrilling to be. It's like watching the Yankees in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and everything that they did. So, and congratulations to them, of course, and congratulations also to Chris Schmidt and the new Bremen Cardinals, who not only won, they won convincingly. They won in MAC style.
They did. Running clock against Warren JFK, and the Marion Local Flyers had their share of running clocks in state championship games, but they did not have one Saturday. They had to work harder than they typically have to work for it, and you might think that would have made head coach Tim Goodwin a little anxious. It might have, but he also said he enjoyed it. So let's bring him in and let him explain. Tim, thanks for your time tonight. Congratulations on the win on Saturday, and I was watching you, as you might be able to tell closely from the story I wrote about you guys on Saturday, and I will say you were pretty flatlined during the game, and your comments afterward I found very interesting. What was it you liked about the way that unfolded?
Well, we got tested. Our kids didn't play our best, but they competed every play and didn't back down, and obviously we made enough plays to come out on top. It was just fun. We hadn't, been tested for 48 minutes. So it was just enjoyable.
Tim, sometimes when you watch a game like that, you wonder, when you have 11 shutouts in the course of the season and nobody really pressed you for much of the season, I'm going to say 98% of the season, you didn't have your backs to the wall, how hard it is for high school kids to turn on that type of competitive zeal, that kind of, hey, we got to grind this out and make this work. We haven't been in this position. How hard is it to flip that light switch in high school?
Well, I mean, that's what I was worried about. Just that we have the ability to play well under stress, when the game was in doubt. And like I said, I was proud of our kids. It wasn't anything that we did, throughout the season that made it so that we weren't tested, into the, late fourth quarter, but that's just the way it went this year. So, it was fun. I think our seniors especially had a blast out there, because, they were getting hit and they were hitting, and it just was very, very enjoyable.
I'll tell you what, it made it particularly impressive for me to watch, because I see Marion play a lot. It's a privilege to get to have that relationship and be in a position to write about you guys. And I recognized early on, as you said a moment ago, that you weren't having a particularly sharp day. Some penalties and a couple of just things that are uncharacteristic with Marion football, particularly on that stage. And yet your kids played through that. They played through that. They figured it out on the fly, which a lot of coaches say that's the mark of a great team, is to figure out how to reinvent yourself during the game itself.
Yeah. I went back and watched the film a little bit yesterday just because I couldn't help myself. And, we left some stuff out there that's, kind of disappointing. We didn't execute a couple of things, but, our kids played hard, and a lot of that execution problem were Kirtland,
Of course.
We knew their defense was good, but they were better than what I expected, to be honest with you. Did we lose audio there, Sonny?
We
Sorry
lost
about
Mr.
that.
Hooley.
No, I had myself muted. I just wanted to know, in your scouting of Kirtland, I wonder how much of it played out in front of you exactly as you anticipated. They had
That's a great question.
6 shutouts, and you've done this a long time. You've scouted teams a long time. Probably gotten a pretty good handle on what you're going to see and what to expect. I just wonder how much of it matched up to your expectations going in, what you actually saw on Saturday morning and afternoon.
Yeah, we had an idea it was going to be really, really tough sledding offensively. It's not always about who's better, but it's about the matchup, right? And both teams' defense matched up really, really well with the other team's offense. So that part didn't surprise us. I thought we'd move the ball better than what we did. I wasn't sure how many points we were going to score, but like I said, their linebackers in particular were flying to the ball, and we tried to misdirect them. We tried to muddy their reads a couple times, and it still didn't work. So, hats off to them. But our defense played. I'm sure they thought the same thing about our defense.
They did think that about your defense and made that point over and over. Tiger talked about in the post game before you guys got in there about they're fast, they're physical, they're well coached, and he says they're very well experienced. And he said when they're good when you have 11 shutouts, but he said you don't know how good you have to actually come out and play them. Something I wanted to ask you about is what you do when you're trying to play into a 20-25 mile gust wind. There's no way you can coach for that. There's no way you can prepare, no way you can simulate it in practice. Tell me what you said to the kids about going out and playing against that wind.
Well, some years you can do some things. It just depends on really on your quarterback and not just arm strength, but ability to throw a consistent spiral. That's huge in the windy situation. But we tell our kids every year is like, and sometimes you have to punt and play defense and punt and play defense and punt and play defense. And eventually you keep doing that. Hopefully you win the punting game. I'm sounding like Jim Tressel here, I guess, but I mean, it's true. Some games you just have to do that. And when the wind is going, with the field and, 2 of the 4 quarters you're playing are very, very limited in what you can do. Against a good team, it's just you got to stay in it and find something, and we got a pick 6, obviously was huge. We had one decent drive. We had a decent drive and we had it down inside the 2. Then they blew up our running back and ended up 4th and 5. And that's one of the plays that we didn't execute on 4th and 5, and we had a play that would have worked, and we just botched it from the beginning. So, but we got the ball back. That's why I thought we could make the field goal. I mean, it's a chip shot field goal, but then we're kicking off into the wind. Okay, They still have the wind, and it's just the way I've always been. I'd rather go for it there. And if you don't get it, then you have them backed up, and that's exactly what happened. We got good. We stopped them. I think they got 1 first down, but we got good field position, and then that was our one drive, after that.
Tim, I'm curious. Take me through that. You had first and goal at the 5, and then the guy blew you up on first down. It was at the 2. Took you back to the 5.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you recall all the plays, but specifically the last one, unless it's giving away trade secrets. I'm gathering from the way that your running back picked the ball up that you fumbled in the backfield and headed back to his right, that's where the play was supposed to wind up. I figured he went where the blocking was supposed to be. Can you enlighten us as to what, had you not fumbled the handoff or the pitch or what?
Yeah, it was going to be a reverse pass with Kyle Otte coming back with a couple different run pass options coming back. And it looked like it was going to be there. Now, who knows? But it was disappointing that we didn't execute it because I thought it at least had a chance of working. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought it wasn't anything that I didn't think we couldn't make a 20-yard field goal against that wind. I mean, I thought we could, but like I said, then we had to kick off against the wind, and that's really what made my decision right there. We'd be ahead 3-0, but they were going to get the ball, pretty close to midfield.
I was
the wind
curious.
at their back.
I was curious at halftime. They won the toss to start the game and took the ball. And I wondered at halftime if you might, because correct me if I'm wrong, you have the choice in the second half to take the ball or to decide which way you want to kick, correct?
Correct.
I was curious if you might agree to give them the ball in the third quarter so you could have the wind in the fourth. And as it turned out, you had the wind in the fourth anyway. Tell me how that played out.
Yeah, and that didn't surprise me. We were going to take the ball. It wasn't that, I think it would have just had to be a monsoon or a blizzard, I think, for us to give up the ball on that decision. It certainly didn't surprise me that they took the win because, I don't like giving the team the ball and the wind in a situation like that. So that's probably what I would have done if I were them, to be honest with you. And you got to make hay in the third quarter, and that third quarter took an hour, someone told me, and it's like we were going against the wind for, just forever, it seemed like.
In a game like that Saturday, there are so many little things. I don't have to tell you this, but there's so many little things that can ultimately determine the outcome of the game. And one of them was certainly the blocked extra point. And I was standing on their sideline, and somebody beside me said, "Oh, no." He said, that's we just lost the game, because he said they're not going to fumble again. We're not going to get that kind of field position. And now we got to make the 2-point conversion and the touchdown. And I'm sure that went through your mind too. That was a huge moment. I'm not sure how many people actually said, wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it just made their mountain, that much bigger. When somehow they had to try to find a way to score against us, which was difficult for both teams, obviously. And then they would have to have one play for 3 yards, which I don't think either team had too many, easy plays to run for 3 yards. You're going to be doing what we did. Try something that may work, may not work. You may look like a genius, or you may look like an idiot.
When you went back through the game tape, you said you watched it yesterday. What did you see that you didn't notice watching the game live?
Darren Meyer played awesome. That's what I noticed. He played awesome at middle linebacker, and he hadn't played, defense at all for 2 weeks. And, he had that shoulder, and we were like, well, this is your last game. There's nothing else. So, put that brace on and go. And, that was the first thing that came out is, that kid played really, really well. And I'm glad he was able to play.
Darren Meyer, by the way, today, along with Philip Laverty of Kirtland, co-Division 6 Players of the Year in Ohio. So congrats to Darren on that.
Darren Meyer did play well, and it stood out. Particularly I watched him, particularly in the first half, because I knew he hadn't played, and just how he comes back and responds to that situation. But I don't know if you read the Canton newspaper, but the guy who wrote the story in the Canton newspaper was very complimentary of Tate Hess. He said he was my player of the game simply because, he ran for a few yards, 9-10 yards. He threw for 50 yards, but he managed the offense well enough to win in those situations. He was so complimentary, and he pretty much told the tale of Tate Hess and what his contribution to that game was.
Yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made there. And the play that comes to my mind was 4th and 3, I think, on our it was either the drive we scored on or the drive that took us down to the 2. We ran an option play where he just played it beautifully and waited to the last second, pitched it to Kyle Otte, and he scampered up their sideline for, probably our biggest play of the day, if I had to guess. But yeah, once again, we put him on their best receiver and just, Tate, you cover this guy, and we'll worry about everyone else. So it was a huge luxury to have him on defense for sure. And he's just a good athlete, and we felt good with the ball in his hands.
So you mentioned Kyle Otte. He gained 18 yards. Or get a point where you feel something a little extra for somebody who had to stand and watch last year, and this year gets to be an integral part of what you're doing?
Yeah. Kyle's a great kid. His dad has coached with me. I think he said for 22 years, and obviously Peyton, his older brother, last year. It makes me a little bit sick about how good we could have been last year if he would have stayed healthy. Good kid, and he was the one kid really that I thought really could compete against those linebackers, and find a little crease and just put his foot in the ground and go. So yeah, that was good to have Kyle Oddie on the field for sure.
I was thinking today, I wondered if you'd talk about your staff a little bit. I don't know how long you've all been together. I assume it's quite some time, and give you a chance to pay some tribute to guys who I know work as hard as you do at it and may not get their names out there very much.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity because they deserve, recognition, and they do a great job. And first of all, we have a great time together. And I've said this for a long time. Like, if you're not having fun, I mean, you just don't stick with this job. I mean, it's got to be fun. So Dan Koenig's been with me all 24. He started out as junior high my first year, then I moved him up to my second year. Kevin Oddie, I guess, is 22. Greg Bruins, I think, is right 21 years with me. Outstanding D-line coach. Kevin, a great corners coach, and now we got some other guys, some that have played for me. Jacob Sherrick is a kind of my right-hand man right now. Young guy, has got some good ideas and understands everything we're doing. Brian Walters was a great receiver for Marion Local when we first turned this thing around. He comes back and helps with our receivers. Adam Berkey, great quarterback for us. He helps with our quarterbacks. Chad Oddie, another great quarterback for us and a great DB in college. He helps with our quarterbacks. Mitchell Eversole has been with us now a couple of years and kind of a neat, energetic young kid. I'm trying to not make sure you asked me off the top of my head. I wish I would have had a list in front of me because I'm dying that I'm skipping someone. Then we have a new guy this year, Layden DeLauder. He's stepped in and really done a great job. Really pretty slick with the computer, so it's always good to have one of those guys around. I think I covered them all. If not, I'll kill myself later, I guess. But yeah, great guys, and we have a lot of fun together.
Tim, we get asked dozens of times a year by people across the state about how Marion Local just reloads and goes on. You told me before, hey, I'm thinking about next year on the bus ride home from this year, from Saturday. And I don't doubt that one bit. But I'm sure there's people out there sitting here now wondering, you just won your 13th. You've won now 32 games in a row, at least over the last 2 years. What do you build around with coming back next year? I know Drew Louse is coming back next year. I know Kyle Oddie's coming back next year, but some of the names that'll be back next year that you just reload around and move on to the next chapter.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to retool the defense for sure. There's just no way around it. We're not going to be as good defensively. Offensively, I think we have the potential to be better. We have a very talented sophomore class that'll be juniors next year. We went undefeated at JV and freshman this year. We got some kids there, coming. They're just not going to have as many games under the belt as Darren Meyer, Drew Seitz, and Aiden Eifert did. They're just going to be young.
Do you have a Nick Tangeman coming up and a Charlie Hulsman? I was tipped off to say that, a Charlie Hulsman.
we do have some young receivers that are very talented and look like they could have some height to them, like some of those names that you mentioned. So anyway, we feel good about the quarterback position. So we're looking forward to that. It's a process, and I don't necessarily want to speed it up. I like every part of the year and every part of the preparation.
If you haven't recognized him by now, Tim Goodwin, the 13-time state champion coach of the Marion Local Flyers, our guest tonight. And I want to, on a serious note, this is something that Bruce and I talked about after your post game on Saturday, and something I appreciated so much about how much credence you pay to the term competition, competing, how important it is to compete, have fun, win, go out there with a purpose, because I think it's something that's largely overlooked. I think it's some people even look down upon the fact of being the best, having a standard, as you talked about the other day. And I wondered maybe if you'd take a minute and share your thoughts about that with the public at large that didn't get to hear that the other day, because it sure rings a bell when I hear you talk about it.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like, that was enjoyable for us. I mean, like we were all on heightened alert, and everybody was on their toes, and it's just neat when you have a whole sideline of 70 players and 10 coaches and support staff, and we're all on the same end of the rope pulling the same direction. It's just fun to be a part of. And we knew it was all hands on deck. I'm using every cliche I can think of, I guess, but this was a 4 or 5 alarm fire when you're going against basically a mirror image of yourself across the field with a team that shows up and expects to win. So that's just neat to be a part of. But we thrive on competition, and we try to make practice competitive. We try to just talk about it, and I think the kids here are naturally bent that way. I think the community is bent that way, and I guess the one thing that I think that we do, we don't talk about a lot of goals, and we're not as formal as some programs are with certain aspects. But when we see behavior that is desirable for winning, basically, it's the winning mentality. We make sure everyone knows that is what we're looking for right there. This is the example. I could go back, I don't know, 10 years ago, and we had a senior that had a separated shoulder, and he was out for 4 weeks, and we're playing a big game at Versailles. I'll never forget this. And he gets off he was out. He got off the bus with his pads. He had his bag of gear, and I go, like, what are you doing? Like, you haven't practiced. You're not playing. He goes, I just brought him just in case. And when things like that happens, like, you point that out, it's like, this is a winner right here. He brought his pads. He wasn't going to play. He wasn't supposed to play. He didn't practice. But if something happened, he was going to go in there and get dressed.
I know that you've got kids on your roster, even seniors, upperclassmen, that don't have the impact and make the contribution on the field that Tate Hess and Darren Meyer does. But that business about competitive advantage and what it means later in life, somebody said, they talk about all the time, makes you a better man, a better husband, a better father, a better teacher, a better administrator. It just never stops. It also means the same thing to the 68th, 69th, and 70th kid on your roster to have had that same experience. Do you not agree?
Oh, I 100% agree. And, I bring that up, especially at certain times, when you're thinking about a kid that may or may not come out, and do you really need that kid to come out? Probably not. But like you just said, he's going to learn things about himself in a safe environment, and just get challenged. You learn something about yourself when you get challenged. And in football, you literally get knocked down, and you literally have to pick yourself back up and maybe go against the same dude that just knocked you down.
Right.
There's just something about that. I think that not everyone thrives on it, but I think it's important for a lot of us, young men going through, is like, you got to face your fears sometimes, and you got to learn to work through that.
Tim, this is the last one for me. I'm privileged to be able to cover the MAC and coaches like you and many others. 3 weeks ago, I think, when New Bremen won their volleyball title, I was struck by something Diana Kramer said in the post game. And she said, in New Bremen, little boys don't grow up wanting to be LeBron. They grow up wanting to be David Homan. And little girls don't grow up wanting to be Serena Williams. They grow up wanting to be Olivia Heitkamp, one of her best players. And we were having breakfast, Sonny and myself and Tim Beckman and Julie were having breakfast Saturday morning in our hotel. And I was struck by two families that came down to have breakfast. And they looked to be, the guys looked to be, I don't know, in their late 30s, maybe early 40s. Their wives were there. One had four little kids, looked like they were all under 10. One had three kids, maybe all under 10. They were all outfitted in Marion local gear. And I just thought that was such a neat thing. I'm a small town guy, and I know you've obviously had opportunities to leave Maria Stein over the years, and you've stayed. And I just, I'm touched by you talked about all the guys you have on your team and coaches and support people pulling on the rope. And I know the people in the stands aren't actually pulling on the rope, but they're cheering pretty hard for you pulling on the rope. And I just thought I ought to give you an opportunity to talk about your community.
Yeah. I mean, you just gave a pretty good example. I mean, I just love going to our elementary school on a Friday, like everyone has blue and gold on. I mean, everyone. And, it's just neat. And, everyone knows, who the Flyers play and, not just football either. Like you said, it's really neat. It's special. And it's very traditional, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being traditional. And I think there's a lot of good stuff there.
Tim, I appreciate getting to cover you because you're an educator, math teacher, administration now as principal of high school. But one of the best thing about covering you and talking to you is I always learn something from you. And it certainly made me better than what I do. And I wanted to pass that along, appreciate it, along with congratulations on 13 and many, many more, because I think you're having fun doing this.
Oh, yeah. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the great coverage. Our kids are spoiled, between you guys and WOSN, on the TV side, they get great coverage. So, yeah, we appreciate you. And, yeah, every once in a while, and you mentioned Diana Kramer. I have a great relationship with her, and she totally changed the whole mindset of New Bremen. It's kind of cool to watch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time tonight, Tim, and congratulations again on the win.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. See you next year.
Yep, you got it.
Tim Goodwin, the head coach at Marion Local. And I've gotten smart enough not to name the coaches that, make a huge impression on us because you're inevitably going to leave somebody out. But boy, there are a lot of them in the Midwest Athletic and in the Shelby County League and MVL. And we're just, we're just blessed to be around high achieving people who plug into the lives of young people and have built supportive communities around them. And it's fun to do that. I'll
tell you how good he is. And I don't have to tell you this because you understand this as a writer. There are times he is so good at what he does, you don't know what to ask him after the game. You think lightly about asking the question and how you ask it because he's that good and he's that wise and smart about everything that goes on in that football field. And, sometimes you overlook something that to him, you think it's minute. To him, it's a huge, huge deal, like the block extra point the other day. So, he doesn't miss a thing that goes on in that 48 minutes.
Well, I think anybody watching that game Saturday knew that it sounds silly, but 2.5 yards for a 2-point extra point was not easy yardage to come by on Saturday. And It was going to be a high mountain for Kirtland to climb to get another touchdown, seeing as how they probably quite likely scored the only touchdown they got because they started that possession at the 22-yard line after a turnover. But I shared your opinion. When that extra point got blocked, I thought, well, that's a lot bigger advantage psychologically than the 1-point advantage it is on the scoreboard, holding them to 6 here instead of 7.
Yeah, and even the guy carrying the clipboard on their sideline said, "Hey, well, that just beat us because, man, we're not going to get that opportunity again." So,
well, I looked quickly over at the sidelines at Tiger Laverty when that kick got blocked, and his shoulders slumped.
Yes,
because nobody knew it more than he did at that point in time. Well, congrats to the Flyers, and I think that was, as we wrote on Saturday, the game that everybody anticipated back in the disclosure date of the divisions. Kirtland and Marion Local, obviously Coldwater was there and Cary were there, and they were the combatants in the state title game in D6 in 2021. But I don't think anybody was surprised to see Kirtland and Marion Local in the title game. Now, conversely, New Bremen getting to the title game was a surprise to some, but not to you, Mr. Folks. I got to say again that along about week 6 or 7 in the season, you told me after covering New Bremen that team is good enough to win the Division 7 state championship. And you were right.
Well, I knew what David Holman was. And Chris Schmidt had told me back in August, early August, that we lost 16 seniors last year. We got 16 juniors coming back. They'll be seniors this year. And he said a lot of those guys played significant roles last year. They played significant amount of time on the field. And by week 4, you could see that Aaron Tiemann was getting it. Mm-hmm. Ben Saylor was getting it. These role players that were beginning to kind of get puffed up a little bit and feel instinctive and confident, competitive, and feel like winners, even though they lost a couple of very difficult games going into week 10, and they lost that finale to Delphos St. John. And when I saw, and this is cliche too, David Holman makes everybody better on the field. Well, you've heard that said for decades and decades about a particular player and how the respect for other players helps, the sum is greater than the parts. And that's what they became by about week 5 or 6. And that's when I said to you, and I really believe the same thing about Fort Loramie. I said, one of those two teams from this area in Division 7 is going to be in Canton. And I think Loramie had some injury issues that kind of held them back a little bit, got in their way. But New Bremen and Chris Schmidt would tell you that got through the year healthy. Holman had the issue with the turf toe or something like that, a foot injury, that they set out that week at Delphos. But, he came back and played. And I thought the comment that was in our story, I don't know if it was yesterday or today, about the JFK administrator, or maybe he was an assistant coach or somebody, and he was dressed all in JFK. And I asked him, I said, did you expect this team to be that good again 2 out of 3 years? He said, I can't, that's hard to answer. But he said, it's really hard to prepare for a team that every time they snap the ball, they're capable of making a dynamic play. And that was the term he used, a dynamic play. It's hard to defend that for 48 minutes. And boy, they came out, got the ball the first possession of the game and right down the field, boom, 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 put them on their heels. And he said, we never recovered from that.
And that was quite a first series. I mean, as I'm watching it, it did not start in a promising fashion. They got backed up 3rd and 17, and Holman rolled to his right and really had nothing. I thought he was just going to run out of bounds. They were going to punt the ball. They had the wind at their back, so okay, no big deal. But you get the momentum if you're JFK of stopping him on a 3 and out, and he slings a 22-yard pass slightly back, across the middle of the field to Aaron Peppelman, who's in because Ben Saylor had an equipment issue. First down, New Bremen, and it still from that point wasn't a sure thing. They were 3rd and 6, and Holman picked up 4, and they went on 4th down. He picked up 2. They were 3rd and 8 down near the goal line, or maybe the 20-yard line, and he was caught, hemmed in, slipped and slid, and figured out a way to get the first down. And then the next play, Hunter Schaefer scored on a 13-yard run. And I'm thinking, boy, if you're JFK and you're the number 1 team in the state and you've had these guys backed up on 3rd down 3 times and on 4th down once, and they've converted every single one, and now you're down and you're going into the wind, that's a hard thing to deal with.
That's not a good omen.
Yeah. And then the second, New Bremen punted the next time, but then they got it back and David went 61 yards. And you're like, all right, this is probably going to be another New Bremen route. And indeed it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to that point about those guys like Saylor and like Tiemann. Peppelman's another one of those players that they observe what's going on during the course of the season. They get more confident. If he can do it, I can do it. We all do it. We've all got each other's back. That's cliche as well, but it really does work out that way. That's why, again, to Tim Goodwin's point that he just made about competition, we like to compete because when you have to compete, that's when you get better. And that league is known. If you don't compete, nobody in that bottom 4 or 5 in that league ever wants to be embarrassed. And you go back to week 10, and even though I know they didn't have David Holman, but Delphos St. John was 3-6 going into that game, and it meant a lot more for them to finish 4-10 than it did, to acknowledge the fact that they were underdogs to New Bremen.
I said,
Okay.
can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said Delphos can say that they beat the reigning state champions. And the only other teams that did that were Marion Local and Coldwater.
They can say that, but here's something that I thought a lot about during the weekend. Joe Neves today, or somebody I was talking with, Joe and I worked together a long time at WPTW, and he does our Friday night minute-to-minute scoreboard for us now. And somebody today asked me, "What did you take away from the tournament? What's your overall impression of the tournament?" And I said to him, I'm glad that I didn't do those number 1 versus number 16 seed games early in the tournament. I'm glad I didn't see the West Liberty Salem, Marion Local game. I'm sorry I didn't see.
That wasn't 16-1. I think that was 8 or 9-1.
I guess it was Anna.
That was week 2.
It was actually 16. But I'm glad that I didn't see the Lakewood St. Ed game. I'm glad I didn't see the Valley View game. I'm glad I didn't see all those number 1s and 16s, because there weren't any 16s or 15s or 14s or 13s in Canton this weekend. And again, you could say whatever you want to about expanding the experience, but you know what? When it comes down to it, the cream rises to the top, and there is a big, big, big difference I saw this week in the teams that were in Canton and the teams that had no shot at getting there. They got a playoff game under their belt and an extra week of practice to prepare for next year.
Yeah, and we rightfully gave great tribute to Tim Goodwin, and we should give the same to Chris Schmidt. What a job Chris has done at New Bremen. Again, you can go back in the archives and find my story from 3 years ago, talking about Chris coming to New Bremen from Bellefontaine, where he was the head coach for 3 years. It didn't go well. They let him go. He lands at New Bremen, where they actually had a meeting to determine if they were going to keep football or not. And 5 years later, they're in the state championship game, and they win it with a running clock. And back they come 2 years after that and win another one. And their run to the title this year, the seniors on that team, Hunter Schaefer, Ben Saylor, David Homan, and others that I talked to, said that this year's run was more a product of the loss to Tri-Village last year in a game they led and then lost control of than it was the residual confidence and all those things you get from winning a state championship in 2020. So that was quite a sophomore class that Coach Schmidt had there in 2020. And they were certainly the foundation behind his team this year, because, boy, you go through my game story from Saturday afternoon, and there are a lot of names in it because there were a lot of plays made by New Bremen Cardinals on defense and on offense. And they were just a pleasure to watch. And it's a big time in New Bremen because they won the volleyball state championship and the state football championship. And that's a pretty good fall sports season when you hang not just one, but 2 banners.
Well, I know there's some people who will watch this over the course of the week because we record it, and you can watch it on Facebook tomorrow if you miss it live tonight. But I'll say this to people who might be wondering about what the MAC's going to be like now. Who's going to be the preeminent favorite next year? Well, obviously it's going to be Marion Local. But now you've got, and obviously it's going to be New Bremen. And obviously Coldwater is a contender every year. Mm-hmm. And one of these years, St. Henry's going to rebuild and get back and get in their customary form. But you've also got a Minster who had a fantastic year this year, coming off 1-9 last year in the regular season. They've got one of the most dynamic young quarterbacks in Brogan Steffi. And he's a sophomore this year. Mm-hmm. They also had 4 or 5 sophomore receivers that could outrun a greyhound and go catch the ball besides. And they're all coming back, and they can't wait to play football next year. Yeah. They cannot wait. From 1-9 to 6-4 this year, and a playoff win as well. They can't wait to get back the pads and helmets and get out there next year and seriously compete with the other teams that we just mentioned. I didn't mean to leave out Versailles. Versailles is going to that's going to be a very strong 5-team, very strong top 5 team league going into 2023.
Well, we have had a habit here of identifying a team kind of on the rise during my tenure here with PressPros, and we identified Versailles prior to last season as a team that could win it all, and they did as a 5 seed in their region. We identified this year Milton Union, and the Bulldogs went undefeated until Valley View avenged the loss that they'd suffered to Milton in week 2. And I would say right now, my team for 2023 is definitely Minster. Having watched them against Fort Recovery in the playoffs, that's a team, and Seth Whiting's doing a great job at Minster. They're a program with a lot of tradition, a lot of pride. They've won state championships before under Garen Stokes, and that would be the team that I would identify as one right now to keep your eye on in 2023 because we got quite a tradition going on here, Mr. Fulks, and I can only take it back as far as I go with this little endeavor called PressPros. But in every year that I've been with you, the MAC has won not just 1 state championship, but 2. And I wouldn't bet against it next year with Marion Local and Minster.
I don't know exactly what New Bremen's got coming back next year, although I know they had a junior class this year with the kids that made significant contributions from time to time. But I can tell you this, at Minster, since you just mentioned them, they've got such a good competitive culture there in basketball with Mike McClurg, their coach there. Certainly with baseball, 3-time state champion in baseball with Mike Wiss. They are now a 3-time state champion in football. They won back in the 80s, and then they won the 2 with Garen Stokes here recently. And so, yeah, they're right in it. This everything falls right in their wheelhouse going forward for the next 2 or 3 years because they've got the cycle that I like to call it of athletes. Coaches don't win anything. You got to have kids out there that can play, and they've got a good cycle of kids there who are very well taught, just like Tim does at Marion Local. The 3 names that I just mentioned to you, plus Seth Whiting, they've got it going on and they got the tradition, the culture, and it means something there. There is expectation in these communities. It's not just the fact that somebody did it 30 years ago and once every generation you catch lightning in a bottle and do it. No, the expectation is you're going to be good at what you do, and everybody does something in school.
Well, I was privileged to be kind of the guy that followed Versailles through its playoff run last year, and I was privileged this year to be the guy who the New Bremen games fell to me at least 3 times in the postseason. And I'll tell you what, for a team to win a state championship, a lot of times you get a break because you avoid somebody who lost that you were expecting to play, or you caught them on a day where their top guy or one of their second guys was injured. None of that applies to New Bremen this year. I don't know how you could have a tougher road to a championship this year than New Bremen did. As the 5 seed, they had to beat the 4, I believe was Riverside. They had to beat the 2, who I don't remember who that was, but they had to beat Ansonia, the 1, in the snow at Greenville, where they had the ball literally half the game because Ansonia had it for the entire game.
They had to beat Loramie.
And they had to beat Loramie was the 2. That's who Loramie. Yeah, Loramie was the 2. And then you get to the state finals and you have to play the team that's ranked number 1 all season, Warren JFK. So a great supporting cast around 2 very dynamic offensive players with the ball in their hands, Hunter Schaefer and David Homan. Hunter ended the season with, I think, 28 touchdowns, and David Homan had 27. So that's a real 1-2 punch right there. Both of them with right around 1,800 yards rushing. David Homan with about 3,000 yards total offense. By the way, he's a first-team All-Ohio defensive back. And I'll just say this. I know there's no perfect way to award an all-state team. because we don't have newspapers covering high school football like we used to in the Associated Press days. And nevertheless,
back then.
Nevertheless, we award an all-state team. But I will say, and I'm sure that, there's probably a hesitancy that, well, this kid made it first-team defense, and so we're not going to make him first-team offense too. But there were, I think, 5 first-team quarterbacks in Division 7. There were 4 or 5 second-team All-Ohio Division 7 quarterbacks. There were 4 or 5 third-team All-Ohio Division 7 quarterbacks, and an array of honorable mention quarterbacks, and none of them were named David Homan. And
Whoops.
That is laughable because, as Chris Smith said after the game, there is not a better player in Division 7 than David Homan. And he was not the defensive player of the year, and he was not the offensive player of the year. And some of that is the fact that he was on a 7-3 team in the regular season. But that young man, he may have played his last down of football. I don't know. But if he did, he went out he went out the way you want to. Yeah. 4 touchdowns, leading his team to a state championship.
I can't get off the air tonight without talking about Bryce Schondelmeyer and at Springfield. And honestly, I know there's people out there because they have come to me this year and asked, what do you think about, the transfer? And that seemed at the time like a selfish thing to do. You're leaving your community, your home, the kids you grew up with, your teammates and things like that, because you want a bigger challenge, a more competitive challenge in football. And I guess you can argue the pros and cons of that all night long. But the one thing that you have to admit is it takes a lot of guts to bet on yourself, to stick your neck out like that and say, I want to play in that game that I played in Friday night. I want to be there on the field against St. Ed's. I want that kind of challenge in my life, that experience. And I'm betting on myself to go to Springfield, transfer, sell the house, move, do it the right way, as you said the other day. Go there, bet on myself, and he didn't win it Friday night, but he won. He did. He went out there and he opened a lot of eyes this year with the kind of year that Bryce Schondelmeyer had. And in fact, somebody posted something. I saw it on Twitter the other day, where he graduated. He finished 4 years of high school at quarterback with more yards than Joe Burrow had at Athens, yards passing than what Joe Burrow had. And congratulations to that young man. He is a great, great kid, comes from a great family. I've known him for years. I remember when he was born, in fact, because that was back when Jason was coaching the first time at Arcanum back in the late 80s. And just a fantastic story about this young guy. He grows up and again, when you bet on yourself, one of the old Hall of Fame baseball players said, ain't bragging if you can do it. And he did it.
Yeah, and I share that. I my eyebrows went up when I heard he was playing at Springfield. And I will say, if you're going to do it, the Schondelmeyer family made an enormous financial sacrifice, I'm sure, and a life-changing family decision to sell your house and move to Springfield. That's the right way to do it. That's the way the OHSAA allows transfers. They didn't get an apartment. They didn't fudge it. They didn't try to, move him in with an aunt or an uncle and claim there was some kind of family drama that led to that. They did it the right way. And that young man, if he's not a Division I quarterback at the MAC level or at a school like Purdue, which loves to throw the football, I will eat my hat. And I talked to Bryce a little bit after the game, and nobody has really made many overtures to him as a Division I quarterback. And if you look at his numbers against St. Ed's, just his numbers, you might say, well, he had a lot of yards, but he got up against really good talent and he didn't get the job done. You have to watch the game film of that game to know how little chance Bryce Schondelmeyer had to be Bryce Schondelmeyer. Because as Mo Douglas, the coach at Springfield, said after the game, they got a freshman tackle and 3 sophomores, and it was a revolving door on the offensive line for Springfield that night. And Ed's has 2 defensive ends who are both Division I signees, one at Northwestern, one at Coastal Carolina. They each had 16 sacks during the regular season, and they were in the backfield almost before Bryce Schondelmeyer could get the snap in the shotgun formation and look down the field to scan it. And he still had his team within a touchdown entering the fourth quarter. And he was under duress all night, sacked 9 times. He ran for first downs. I know he didn't want to run, but he had to for his life. I was so impressed with him and what he can do. And I've been on the phone to a couple MAC programs in the aftermath of that game asking, what are you thinking? Not offering this kid or taking this kid, at least offering this kid a visit and checking out his game tape, because Bryce Schondelmeyer can play Division I football and can start Division I football for a lot of teams in the state of Ohio and a lot of teams that come into Ohio Stadium. He's that good.
Well, there were several veteran players. I wrote about him last year when he was at Arcanum because he threw for almost 3,000 yards last year. And I had people who were some retired coaches and veteran people who followed football in the area. And they said, yeah, but, throwing against Mississinawa is not the same as throwing against real competition or better competition. And I don't know how tough he is because he never gets tackled and he never gets this. He never gets that. He doesn't get – I'll tell you how tough he is. What was he the other night? 22 for 30? Yeah. Something like that. 22 for 30, and he gets sacked 9 times. And as you said, ran for his life most of the night.
Yep.
Against that type of team, that type of challenge. He came out of that a winner one way or another. He did in some manner because somebody is bound to take a chance on him that didn't know about him or was questioning again, how tough is he? How tough is he? Because he's never had to be in a situation like he will be at the Division or 1 or 2 level next year. And he proved, I thought the other night, without a question of a doubt, that he can handle that type of responsibility and challenge.
Well, I'm watching him in the pregame warm-up because I want to see him throw the football, and I want to see how quick he got rid of it. And his release is really quick. And he never got the chance in the game. Not one time did he get the chance to take a 3 or 4 step drop and scan the field and look for his third option. Maybe a time or two he got to look at his second option, but not even very often did he get to look at the second option. And he's got really good receivers. He's got a couple D1 receivers out there. But, sometimes you can look more impressive when you're struggling than when everything's going well, because it tells you kind of what's in here in a kid's heart. And I also was struck, and this is what people don't get to see, Bryce Schondelmeyer kind of parachutes into Springfield to play quarterback. And I'm sure that those receivers had a guy that they thought was going to be the quarterback for them. And the way those young men from Springfield talked about Bryce Schondelmeyer told me a lot about how good of a leader he is and how good of a person he is for building friendships and relationships in a short time. And you don't do that just because you can throw the football. You do that because you work hard and you impress your teammates with how hard you work and how dedicated you are to it, how much tape you watch, the kind of humility that you reflect. And so that was pretty impressive for me to see the whole backstory around Bryce Schondelmeyer and the Springfield Wildcats.
Well, I said when we came on tonight that it was a great weekend because we saw some spectacular things. I thought the effort that Marion had in winning the way they won was spectacular, frankly. I've seen 8 of their championships, and I think this one was, and this is what I wrote the other day, it was the toughest of the 13 titles for the way they had to win. I thought New Bremen was just as impressive to go out and get a team that knew about you now. You're not a surprise anymore. Mm-hmm. They'd seen you on tape. They knew about you. They knew about David Holman, and they still got smoked. When you look at St. Ed's, whatever you think about public versus private, the job they do at St. Ed's of continuing continuity with that football team, and the fact that they play with all kinds of kids there. They got big ones. They got tiny kids there.
Yeah, Marvin Bell's not a big kid.
Holy smoke! And I heard what you said the other night. The first time he carried the ball, wow! We saw spectacular football players there. Yeah, we didn't see any 16 seeds, but we saw some spectacular football there. And it's the reason you go back year after year after year. If you like to see those kind of things for yourself, it's the crown jewel of the OHSAA tournaments.
And just on the public-private thing, it's not most private schools you can tell from the name. They have a saint in their name or something like that. People might not know Warren JFK is a parochial school. Warren JFK is a Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
And when you running clock a Catholic school, that's dominant.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Twice.
dominant.
Twice.
Yeah. So congratulations to the New Bremen Cardinals, and thank you. I mean, you guys are so fun to cover. I had so much fun covering Coldwater at Bell Fountain and Marcel Blasingame, and my heart just broke for Marcel when he broke his leg against Versailles. And what a gutty win that was by the Cavs that night to beat Versailles without Marcel Blasingame. And I don't always make it over to the PressPros origination area, but I really enjoyed covering Minster and getting to see Brogan Steffi and meet Seth Whiting on the night they beat Fort Recovery in the playoffs. I loved following Tip this year. Matt Burbacher, Liam Peronsky, man, those kids from Tip are just first-class kids. They're going to be back deep in a playoff run because he's got a program there, not a team. Obviously, Marion Local is I refer to them as the Marion machine. I mean, they are just a machine, and that's not that's not dismissive at all. That's admiration, pure admiration coming across. And New Bremen, I just love that community and the young men who play for Chris Schmidt. And I really admire Chris Schmidt because there's a guy who could have said, well, I wanted to be a head coach. It didn't work out. Guess I'm going to be an assistant for a while. But he got right back on the horse. And what a reward for him to be able to hold 2 state championship trophies in 3 years. So thank you to everybody over there. And I'd toss into, the Coldwater girls volleyball team. I got to write a little bit about them, and it's just, I thoroughly enjoy this. I've done a lot of big assignments, and people would think they're more fun than doing this. But I will tell you, a couple years ago, I was on my way to cover a playoff game, and I had a friend of mine from Cleveland who worked with me at the Plain Dealer call me and asked me what I was doing. I said I was going to a high school football playoff game. He said, to watch it? And I said, no, to cover it. And he said, well, you've covered national championship games and a World Series and a Super Bowl and bowl games. Like, what are you covering high school football for? And I said, because I want to. And he said, well, you want to? Why do you want to? And I said, because when I go to a high school football game, those kids are glad to see me. They're glad to see me. And and that's kind of fun because when you're at a college game or a pro game, believe me, they're not glad to see you.
And it's the reason why, and I have to put this in. We'll go a minute or two late here tonight, but I got to say this: guys like Tim Goodwin and Chris Schmidt and all the coaches in this area, Matt Burbacher,
Chip,
Coach Chip Otten, Brett
Diane
Pierce,
Kramer.
those guys are so good with their time to come on with us like he did tonight. Call him during the week. Hey, I need to know something. Blah 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 blah. I'm working on something. Can you help me out? Never been turned down. And they're so good because they know that helps their kids. They know it helps their program. It's appreciated in the community. And guys, gals, all of you, from the bottom of our hearts, I don't mean to say cliche, but we couldn't do it without you. And it's you making the job so much better and so much easier for us.
Absolutely right. So this week we have Ohio State basketball on Thursday night against Rutgers. That's the Big Ten opener for the Buckeyes. We'll have Ohio State wrestling on Saturday afternoon. The opponent escapes me at the moment, but we will have that. Kent State, you're right. We will have that match for you on Sunday afternoon. We have high school basketball starting up, and Mr. Folks will be regaling us, I'm sure, over the next week or so with tales of a tradition that he undertakes after the football playoffs, and that is to go bird hunting out west.
Well, I'm going to take a couple of days. I always do, 2 or 3 days this weekend, and go out and meet up with some friends. And of all places, you can look it up. You can look it up, like Casey used to say, Noonan, North Dakota. It'll be 20. It is 21 below zero there as we speak.
Wow. Well, you have fun doing that. I will not be a part of 21 degrees below zero. Trust me on that.
And the only place to eat there is a place called the Trails End. And it's the only place I've ever gone in for dinner where there were 2 pickup trucks and 2 horses hitched outside, side by side. It's real Americana, and I will come back next week and tell you about it.
All right. Well, if you run into Governor Dutton of Montana out there, let me know. All right.
Or Jay Silverheels.
Yeah, exactly right. With that, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for another great season of MAC football. We look forward to another great season of Shelby County League, MAC basketball, MVL basketball, and we thank our sponsors who make all this possible. So follow us on Instagram at PressPros Magazine, Facebook, and Twitter is at PressPros Mag. Tell your friends about the replay, patronize our sponsors, and we'll see you again next Monday night here on the PressProsMagazine.com Huddle Show.